This is Adam Bernard from AutoPerspectives, and it is time once again for another news roundup to look at some of the more interesting things happening in the auto industry over the past week. And you will note that this particular episode will be a little heavy on the French. We'll start with Alpine. Alpine, you might recall, is the performance sub-brand for Renault that goes back to the 60s that eventually was spun off a few years back into its own brand. Like Lotus, another brand known for its lightweight sports cars, Alpine is attempting to reboot themselves as a premium performance electrified brand. Last year we saw the A390, which was basically a fancy high-performance version of the Renault 5 E-Tech, but we see Alpine's first dedicated vehicle. The SUV that you see here is not a Renault that's got a badge slapped on it, but is its own distinct product. It is the A390. It is the second of 7 EVs due by 2030. Alpine would describe it as a sport fastback. The rest of us know better. It is essentially an SUV coupe, not unlike what Mercedes, BMW, and Audi have been peddling for the past several years. So taller seating position, more functional package, but because of the coupe roofline, a somewhat compromised rear seat. Underneath it, it leverages the CMF EV platform, underpinning the Renault Scenic E-Tech EV as well as its Macan sibling. One thing you'll note up front, in between the headlamps is something very similar to the Dodge Charger. That blade that runs across the leading edge of the hood is expected to help overall with aerodynamics. Now, even though it's based on a Renault platform, it is not just, as I noted, a rebadged Renault, and one of the notable changes is the motors. Motors as in 3 of them. This is a tri-motor layout, so one motor in the front, 2 motors in the back, gives them quite a bit more performance and capability. The 89 kilowatt hour battery offers both V2L and V2G bi-directional charging capability. So you can both plug in an electric device into the A390, or you can send energy back to the grid and get some credit from your power company for that. The A93 GTS flagship boasts 470 horsepower and 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in just a little under 4 seconds. The entry-level GT will hit about 345 miles on the European cycle, which translates to just a little under 300 miles on the EPA. Prices are expected to start at about 20,000 euros less than a Porsche Macan. So yes, this is a poor man's Macan. Inside the A390, the instrument cluster and portrait-style center stack look very similar to what we see on the Macan, but there's a lot more unique bits on the inside as well, here with a unique blue and white color scheme. There's a lot of Alpine-relevant design, technology, and performance features baked into the A390. The 3 motors enable the Alpine active torque vectoring. There's an aluminum cradle for the twin rear motors, a unique high-performance battery chemistry, track-focused onboard telemetrics, and a red overtake button for the driver, which you can see there on the right steering wheel spoke. Because it's based on a Renault, you do get a lot of economies of scale, so that's good news for the A390. The strong aero focus builds on Alpine's heritage, and the pricing seems to be pretty aggressive, especially given the high levels of standard equipment. That being said, there are some challenges. It is a relatively unknown brand. It is a 400-volt architecture, so it does charge up to 190 kilowatts, which is not bad for 400 volts, but as the luxury brands move to 800 volts, that puts Alpine at a bit of a disadvantage. The range numbers could be better. Again, some of the luxury brands are easily topping 300 miles, and 4,700 pounds is kind of porky for a compact performance SUV, definitely for an Alpine. So it's not a lightweight, so some marketing communications brilliance will be needed here as they talk to customers. But overall, this seems like a pretty impressive first shot. I would not mind spending some time behind the wheel of this, but we won't know more until it is launched later this year. Beyond the A390, Alpine has more goodies on the shelf, including a mid-engine 1,000 horsepower hybrid V6 turbo that is due by 2028. This was previewed by last year's Alpenglow concept, and according to Autocar, both the V6 and the electric motors would likely be developed internally at the Hypertech Alpine R&D Center. It's worth noting that Alpine's CEO was working at Ferrari R&D when they developed the SF90 plug-in hybrid supercar. So this CEO knows wherefrom he speaks when it comes to a plug-in hybrid supercar. It'll use a conventional setup similar to the Lamborghini Revuelto, so mid-engine V6 and 2 motors up front. But for future electric Alpine sports cars, the company is also developing in-wheel motors. So those would go into the next generation A110 2-seater and a new entry, the A3 Gen GT that you see in the upper right there. That is a 2+2 either as a two-door hatchback or a four-door fastback like the Porsche Taycan. These in-wheel motors are intended to provide more room for people, cargo, and batteries, but they do present some technical issues, notably unsprung weight. Only Lordstown Motors has managed to bring in-wheel motors to market, and obviously the Lordstown Endurance as a full-size truck is very different from an Alpine sports car. So there is some work to be done between now and the next couple of years. We will see how Alpine does, but it could be a bit of a game changer for electric high-performance vehicles. Meanwhile, in SUV land, we have two brands returning to market over the next year and change. The first is the Toyota FJ Cruiser. We've been hearing rumors about the FJ coming back to market for a while now. This would slot below the rebooted Land Cruiser 250 that launched last year. The FJ Cruiser images have now appeared in the patent office, and so the folks at CarScoop decided to get a rendering done to see what it would look like in production. And as you can see, it's still boxy looking with squared off wheel openings and a thick C-pillar, but it does have conventional rear doors, unlike the previous FJ, which had the rear access doors, so a little more functional. It does resemble the compact cruiser EV concept from 4 years ago. You see that there in the bottom right, but it is larger. It's now roughly the size of the Bronco Sport, with which it would compete, and it is no longer an EV, more importantly, but it's expected to be hybrid. It's a little unclear what's under the skin. The location of the front wheel suggests it might be front drive because there's not a lot of dash to axle, but some of the media are reporting that they'd use the low-cost IMV0 body-on-frame platform. That'll be used for the next generation Hilux, which is Toyota's midsize truck outside North America. So we'll have to wait and see in the next year and a half or so until this vehicle makes its official debut. Also returning to the market is the Cherokee nameplate. Up until recently, this was referred to as the new Jeep midsize Cherokee, midsize SUV, but now it is officially the Cherokee that will be on sale late this year. The previous Cherokee was discontinued 2 years ago, and at one point was a big volume seller for the Jeep brand. The outgoing model peaked at 239,000 units in 2018. But unfortunately, like other Jeeps, it suffered from a bit of neglect. It ran for 9 years with only one facelift, and frankly, given how competitive the compact SUV segment was, it just didn't stay competitive enough, and the volume started to drop off. That being said, I think a lot of folks were surprised that the Cherokee just disappeared completely without a replacement, and dealers have had to wait almost 2.5 years to get a new nameplate into the showroom. The new Cherokee will move to the Stella Large architecture, and it will include a, quote, hybrid, unquote. Mild hybrid, strong hybrid, plug-in hybrid, don't know. Could be a combination thereof. We will have to wait until later this year for additional details. I would expect to see this vehicle at the LA Auto Show, if not sooner, and then we'll get information on that as well as pricing between now and the end of the year. And finally, I can remember the days when a lot of the Chinese vehicles that you saw were virtually identical to premium legacy automobiles like Range Rover or the Porsche Macan. Those two in particular seem to suffer quite a bit from the clone problem. Now, the good news is that as the Chinese vehicles have gotten more competitive and the technology has improved and they are getting better looking and they no longer look like Western vehicles. The challenge, unfortunately, appears to be that they look largely like themselves. And if I didn't tell you we're looking at a Denza and a Deepal and a Geely, you might be hard-pressed to guess which vehicle belongs to which brand. Just as SUVs have gone crazy here in America, the Chinese folks are hopping on board, and so adding more and more SUVs to the showrooms, but at a cost of potential confusion to buyers. On top of the brand identity issues, it's also getting crowded. The N8L that you see there on the left is only 58 millimeters shorter than an N9 with very similar surfacing and proportions. And so if you're a SUV buyer walking into the showroom and you see these two vehicles, you might be hard-pressed to tell the difference. And if you can't tell the difference between two vehicles, it's just going to leave the buyer confused. So just as the Chinese government would prefer some consolidation among the hundreds of automakers currently battling for business in the country, this situation may force some portfolio rationalization among Chinese automakers. So, now that they've realized that their customers want SUVs, maybe they won't flood the showroom with so many nearly identical products, but we will have to wait and see what happens. And that brings us to the end of Auto Perspectives this week. If you liked what you saw and what you heard, please subscribe and share. And if you want to learn more about us, please visit at www.autoperspectives.net. Thanks for listening, and we will see you in about a week. Bye-bye.